Hi. Today I want to talk a little bit about the Enneagram and particularly how it can be useful for writers to use as a way to kind of conceive of their characters. The Enneagram is basically a personality typology. For a lot of folks, they're maybe familiar with the Myers-Briggs, which is the 16 personalities, has a website on that one. There's lots of different ways of sort of thinking of personality types. And some we use in counseling and some we don't really use. Enneagram is one of those. It's been around for decades. I remember learning about the Enneagram when I was a little kid. I think my aunt had a book on the Enneagram, and we'd sit and try and figure out what types we are. I don't think it's used as much in counseling anymore, although it seems to still have a place with Christian counselors. Uh, Not sure why it's stuck with them and not with others, but they seem to use it. I don't really use too much Enneagram stuff with my clients. I'll talk a little bit about it sometimes, but it doesn't seem to have much practical application in a clinical setting, from my experience at least. But it is a great way to sort of, from a fiction writer perspective, to think of characters. Um, the way the Enneagram is broken down is there are 9 different types, and each type has their own little name. And what I think I'm going to do over the course of a series is talk about each one of those types in a little more in depth. And hopefully it'll be useful maybe to you if you're just a reader and want to learn more about personality types, or if you're a writer, this might help you kind of think of different ways to use your characters, or think of your characters, that sort of thing. It has this sort of strange looking, I don't know how you describe it. It's a polygon. It has a weird shape to it, and all 1 through 9 of those are at the different points. I'm gonna put up a picture here. Um, the way it works is each one of those lines corresponds to how each type works with each other. Um, if you're a type that when you're stressed, you tend to move over in this other type, or when you're relaxed, you're another type over here. And the notion is that a person might naturally be one way, but when they're in a stressful situation, they tend to act like in another way. And if they were to get out of that stressful situation, they would revert back into that other way of living. It also talks about like different motivations that people, the different types have, and how they all relate to each other. But what I really like about using it from more writing perspective is, one, you have 9 different character types, and each one is rather different from all of the others. And so right there, that's just 9 characters that you could put in a book just by using those different types without going any deeper than that. You can just kind of use, like, in my book, who do I want to be, like the type 1 type? Who do I want to be type 2, the caregiver? Um, uh, I think certain types lend themselves to being heroes more than others, or villains more than others, but that's an oversimplification. The next thing that I think is really cool about the Enneagram, particularly in this one book, which I think is out of print. I'm gonna post a picture, and if I can find a link to it, I'll post it down there. But they go into really in depth on the health of each of the different types. So what they'll do is they'll not only have a chapter on, like, what type 1 people are like, what the type 1 characteristics are, but they'll talk about how the characteristics of a healthy type 1, an average type 1, and an unhealthy type 1. I think they even talk about extremes, or other people will talk about extremes. And that right there is your character growth, right? If you're writing about a character, you want them to have growth, you want to have them an internal growth, you want them to do things in the world and change in things. And so you can start your book with a character as, at an unhealthy level, or maybe at least average, and then have them work their way up into a healthier way of being. End of story. And that's all going to be conflict. And that can be internal conflict of people trying to resolve past traumas or issues, or it can be external conflict, or both. They kind of feed into each other. The extreme is people who are like really, really sick. And I think we're getting in the realm of like personality disorders. This is your narcissist and the borderlines and the sociopaths and that sort of thing. But that's your villain, right? You take one of the personality types, you make that an extreme personality type, and you make that your villain, make that your antagonist. And now you know basically how they will operate in this world, because an extreme type 2 is going to be very different than extreme type 8, and that'll become more apparent as I talk more about that. And we also talk about the motivations. Some people, some of the personality types, they're more motivated by anxiety than others, and so that will give you an idea of how they will act and motivate and that sort of thing. And to me, I think it's a really great way to sort of get a deeper impression of what your character is like, your motivations of your character, and give you kind of an idea of like how they will act or interact in your story, without having to do something silly like writing out a lot of these character studies that I've seen online. You print them out and they'll talk about what's their birthday, what's their favorite color, what's their favorite music and stuff like that, and those are okay, but to me that's like the icing on the cake. If you just have a big pile of icing, that's not a cake. That's like overly sweet and it's kind of gross. You need to have that cake. You need to have that the basis of this character, and that's much more about their motivations and their desires and that sort of thing. And just trying to fill out a sheet with all that can be a bit daunting, but if you can get very familiar with personality types, then that can give you a much better idea of how they operate. And I think one of the things I like about the Enneagram as compared to other personality typologies like the Myers-Briggs is the Myers-Briggs, and it's a good one, and I tend to actually use that more with my clients than with others. But one of the problems with Myers-Briggs is it kind of reads like the horoscope. You're a Capricorn, and this is how you are. You're a Taurus, this is how you are. You're an INTJ, this is how you are. You're an ENFP, well, this is how you are. There's no real growth there. And I think from a writing perspective, that's something that you want, is you want to be able to visualize, how is my character going to get better, and how do I know and how my readers know that my characters are improving, they're changing, they're growing. And I think that's where the Enneagram, with all these different healthy, unhealthy, average sort of descriptors, can really help with that, really help an author get a really good in-depth view of their characters and stuff. And it's also good for just the average person. If you want to learn more about the Enneagram, perhaps you want to learn like what your type is. I think there is a test you can take online. I think it costs like $12. It's not very expensive. If I can find it, I'll put a link in the description. But really, with most of the Enneagram stuff, the best way to do it is just to read about it, because there's only 9 different types. They're all fairly distinct, and you can kind of read like a little superficial version of each one, because there's a lot of websites that just talk about the Enneagram and the different types and that sort of thing. And so you can kind of read that, and the ones that seem to resonate more with you, just read deeper into those. Just kind of keep going deeper and just keep seeing if it more resonates with you than with others. Because the Enneagram is much more about your motivations in the world and less about how you actually act in the world. Because remember, like I said, we might have one type, but in stressful situations we'll act like another type. But we really kind of want to be acting like this type, but for some reason we feel like we can't. And when I say stressful situations, that's not just like a rough day at work, although that could be, but it could be like when you're in a really unhappy relationship, when you have a really horrible job, when you're really sick, when things just aren't going well for you. That's how you deal with it, and so you act in a certain way, even though you're motivation, your natural tendencies would be to act in a different way. And from a counseling perspective, that's part of my job, is to figure out how we can get them from point A to point B, get them from a unhealthy standpoint into a healthier standpoint. So I'd suggest, if you're interested in the Enneagram, I just really just go online and read about it. The nice thing is this thing's been around for decades. I don't know how old it is, but nobody really owns the Enneagram. So the information's free. So there's lots of websites out there that talk about this. There's lots of books on this one. Probably the best book, and I can't remember the name of it, but I'm going to post a picture, I'm going to post a link in the video, so you'll probably see this over my face. That one, it's nice and thick. I think, unfortunately, the problem is it's out of print. I was lucky and I found one at a Half Price Books here in Austin and snatched that up, and that's been really a valuable tool. So yeah, I think that's about it. What I'm going to do in the future is go through all the other 9 types and kind of talk about how they operate, how they think, a little bit about their types, and if I can, I'll try and find some fictional characters and some historical characters that will tell you more about, give you an idea of like how they interact in a fictional world. But anyway, I will talk to you next time. Bye.